There is absolutely no rabbit in Welsh Rarebit, despite what the name might suggest to a hungry traveller. This iconic British comfort food is, at its heart, a sophisticated elevation of humble cheese on toast. A dish that has travelled from the firesides of 18th-century Welsh cottages to the menus of high-end London bistros. To understand why we call it a rabbit, we have to step back into the social history of the British Isles. In the 1700s, the term was originally Welsh Rabbit. Historians generally agree that this was a piece of biting, class-based sarcasm. At the time, rabbit was a common source of protein for the landed gentry, who had the land and the means to hunt. For the Welsh peasantry, however, meat was a luxury. By calling a simple dish of melted cheese Welsh Rabbit, the English were poking fun at the Welsh, implying that cheese was the only game they could catch. It was a linguistic jab at poverty, suggesting that a slice of toasted bread topped with melted cheddar was the closest thing a Welshman would ever get to a proper roast dinner. Over the centuries, the joke lost its sting, and the name underwent a slow, phonetic evolution. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the term rarebit began to appear in cookbooks. It is widely accepted by culinary linguists as a corruption of the word rabbit, a way to clarify that the dish was, in fact, a vegetarian preparation. It was a rebranding that turned a mockery into a culinary staple. But what separates a true Welsh rarebit from a standard grilled cheese sandwich? The answer lies in the craft of the sauce. A grilled cheese is a sandwich. A Welsh rarebit is a technical emulsion. You do not simply slap a slice of cheddar on bread and call it a day. Instead, you create a savory, velvety sauce on the stovetop. The foundation is almost always a sharp, aged cheddar, chosen for its depth and melting point. But the magic happens when you introduce the liquid. Traditional recipes demand a splash of ale or beer. This isn't just for flavor, though the malty, bitter notes of a good stout or bitter provide a necessary counterpoint to the richness of the dairy. The carbonation and the acidity in the ale act as a stabilizer. They help emulsify the cheese, preventing it from breaking into an oily, stringy mess as it heats. When you whisk the cheese into the warm ale, you are creating a stable, glossy mixture that coats the back of a spoon. To this base, you add the aromatics. Mustard is non-negotiable. Its sharp, sinus-clearing heat cuts through the fat of the cheese. Worcestershire sauce adds that essential hit of umami, rounding out the profile with notes of tamarind, anchovies, and molasses. Some chefs add a touch of flour to create a roux-like consistency, while others incorporate a beaten egg to ensure the sauce puffs up and sets beautifully under the heat. The final stage is the transformation. The sauce is poured generously over thick, crusty bread that has been toasted to a golden crisp. This isn't just a vessel. The toast must be sturdy enough to hold the weight of the sauce without turning soggy. Once assembled, the dish is placed under a broiler, or a grill, if you are speaking the Queen's English. You watch it closely as the surface begins to bubble, turning from a pale yellow to a deep, caramelized bronze. The edges of the cheese should char slightly, creating a complex, nutty crust that contrasts with the molten, creamy center. It is a dish of contradictions. It is incredibly simple, yet requires a steady hand to balance the emulsion. It is a dish born of economic necessity that eventually found its way onto the tables of the elite. When you take that first bite, you are tasting a piece of history. A reminder that with a bit of ingenuity, a few pantry staples, and a splash of ale, even the most modest ingredients can be turned into something truly legendary. It is the ultimate British comfort. proving that sometimes the best meals aren't the ones that require a hunt, but the ones that require a little bit of patience and a lot of good cheese.